Tu Beshvat is called the Rosh Hashanah of the trees. So Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of the year for vegetation. Now, on the surface, we don't see any budding, any flowering, any blossoming. We see nothing, especially in New York. And yet, we're celebrating this day as the new year, the beginning of the year for the trees. Because someplace under the ground, where we can't see, there is some process that is beginning that is going to lead us to the spring when the flowers will blossom. In other words, things don't begin when they become visible. There's a process. Before things are on the surface, before things are visible, and before we can appreciate them physically, we have to look a little deeper and know that there's a process going on. Everything starts invisible and then becomes visible. That's the process of creation. That's the process of nature. First, there's a principle. First, there's a concept, and that concept takes on shape and form, and then it becomes physical. Like mass and energy. First, there's energy, and when it collects and repeats and takes on a visible form, then it becomes mass. So Jewish insight, the Torah, clues us in about the process that is going on before we see it. And that gives us a head start on what is to come and what we're going to celebrate and what we're going to benefit when it finally surfaces. But knowing it in advance is itself a great benefit. Like when the sun sets, we know that it's going to rise again in the morning. We're not seeing the sun rise, but knowing that it's going to happen gives us a lot of courage, a lot of positivity. So what we get from this holiday, that the Torah tells us, start celebrating the trees before you see, before it's visible, before it's tangible. Not only know that it's happening, celebrate it. Live it. Take courage from it. Take inspiration from it, because it's real. Today, with modern science, we don't have to convince anybody that things that are not visible are real. Electrons are not visible, but the whole world is made up of electrons. An atom is not visible, but what it can do is awesome. So in a sense, that which is not visible is even more powerful than that which is. And the Torah is the source of this wisdom. Science can tell you what has been discovered, but not what has not been. So the Torah takes us to a much deeper place. Now, the world that we're in today, so much confusion, so many surprises, things we never imagined, we never anticipated, we could never have predicted. One surprise after another. This is a process that leads and brings the world to its perfection. This is the way Mashiach dawns on the world. A number of ingredients here. Firstly, the mixture of good and evil. That in every evil there's a little bit of good, and that in every good there's a little bit of evil. That has been the biggest problem in the universe since Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge. In fact, the tree of knowledge was the mixture of good and evil. The tree of knowledge, good and evil. So we have been working to separate, to wean out the good from the evil and the evil from the good. That's how we fix the world. Tikkun olam. To fix the world means good should be good, evil should be evil. No mixing, no compromising. What we're seeing in the world today is pretty shocking, could be very frightening, but look at what's happening. The good and the evil are parting ways. The good is becoming pure good, and the evil is becoming pure evil. Pure evil is scary. Looks scary. But when evil becomes pure evil, it's doomed. It can no longer exist. The only validity that evil has is the little bit of good that it incorporates. Like a lie, if you don't have a little truth, no one will buy it, it won't fly. A lie can exist only if you bring in a little bit of truth. Take out the truth and it's gone. This is what's happening in the world today. So is it scary? Yes. Is it confusing? Absolutely. But is it bad? No, it's very good. I just want to use one little example of the good that is coming out of this whole process. Shuls were closed. There was no minyan. People weren't going to work. People weren't going to school. People weren't shopping. No one was moving around Pesach time of this year, of the Corona year. There was one man who lives alone. His wife passed away. They never had children. He's completely, totally alone. And then he's told that he has to quarantine. So the night of the Seder, he's sitting in his apartment, and it dawns on him that it's Pesach. He hadn't thought about it. He wasn't aware of it. He doesn't really observe most holidays. He's not into it. But it bothered him that it's the night of the Seder and he's doing nothing. So he went into the pantry and looked for what he can use to make a Seder. He had no matzah, no kind of matzah. He hadn't prepared for Pesach. He didn't even know it was coming. But he found rice cakes, round rice cakes. From a distance, if you're not very, if your eyesight is not very good, the texture looks a little like matzah. It's round, good enough. He took 3 rice cakes and some wine that he had in the house, and he dug out, for those of you who remember, he dug out his grandmother's Maxwell House Haggadah. Maxwell House used to give out a Haggadah, tiny little thing, but it was among his grandmother's stuff. Anyway, he dug it out, and he followed the instructions as best as he could. He had never made a Seder in his life. A few times he attended at his grandfather's, and it's been a long time. Anyway, he did what he could. After Yontif, he calls me, and he tells me what happened. He says, I decided to make a Seder, thinking that it would be a disaster anyway, and not much of a Seder because I don't know what I'm doing. And it's so weird to ask yourself the 4 questions. And I used rice cakes for the matzah and the wine that I had in the house. And I was expecting to feel nothing. But I was surprised. It felt significant. He said it felt like somebody was listening. That is an amazing sensitivity. Because we're told that when you ask the 4 questions, you ask it of your Father. When you ask the 4 questions, your Father in heaven will come down to earth to hear your questions. So yes, somebody heard, somebody was listening. Maybe it was Eliyahu the prophet who comes to every Seder. Maybe Eliyahu was listening. And maybe it was God himself who was listening. Quite impressive. So I've been thinking about that. And I was wondering, what would my very religious friends say if I told them about this Seder? A guy made a Seder using 3 rice cakes. And the wine that he had in the house, it was not Manischewitz. Probably not kosher. And he was fumbling his way through the Haggadah and making all sorts of mistakes in the order of things and so on. What do you think of this Seder? If I asked my religious friends, it's pretty predictable what they would say. They would say it was a shanda. It was blasphemous. Making a joke of the Seder. Rice cakes. If he made a blessing on it, it was a blessing made in vain. They're not matzahs. You cannot fulfill a mitzvah on Pesach with rice cakes. And the wine, the 4 cups, non-kosher wine, he should never have done that. It was a chutzpah. It was an insult to the mitzvah. Not impressed at all. Now, if I would ask my secular friends, a man who didn't realize that it was Pesach decided to make a Seder quickly using rice cakes, and what do you think of that Seder? My secular friends would probably say, he really didn't have to bother. I mean, what for? Unnecessary. He's not religious. It's not his thing. Maybe next year, if he remembers that it's Pesach and prepares and is into it, so he'll make himself a Seder. But it was not necessary. Waste of time. But if we were to ask the Baal Shem Tov, ask the Rebbe, what do you think of this Seder? I'm sure the Rebbe would say, of all the Seders that night, the Seder night of this year, of all the Seders, that one brought God to tears. I mean, talk about pure goodness. Why did he bother? Was anybody going to criticize him if he didn't make the Seder? Would anybody compliment him if he did? Did he have a guilty conscience? He's not into this. This is not his thing. It just didn't feel right to sit through the Seder night and do nothing. Why? Because there's something inherently godly in a Jewish soul, and it moved him. But what moved him? The obligation? He doesn't feel an obligation. Was he afraid of not making the Seder because God will punish him? No, not at all. Did he think he would become famous That he would get respect? That he would get reward for doing this? No, he thought it would be a meaningless act. And yet he had to do it. No ulterior motive whatsoever. None. Aside from the fact that nobody would know whether he did or didn't make a seder. That's pure goodness. And I hear it from so many people all year this year. Couples who didn't get along, bickering, petty stuff. Once they got locked in the house together, they looked at each other differently. They saw something different. And they got closer. The statistic in Israel is that the experts predicted a dramatic increase in divorce. But the facts show that in these last 11 months, the divorce rate in Israel went down. It didn't go up by the 60% they were predicting. It didn't go up by 3%. It went down 3%. Down from normal years. So some people say, well, the courts are closed. So people who wanted to get a divorce had no place to go. No, the divorce rate went down because we underestimated the goodness in people. When the chips are down, when we're not distracted, when we're not running all over the place, busy with all sorts of stuff, the goodness comes out. Pure goodness. No ulterior motives whatsoever. So we should be very encouraged that this year, with its pain and with its tragedies, has brought out the beauty within people. Yes, there were incidents where people did get divorced and it did get nasty. But that's not the majority. Families were terrified of being stuck home with the children. Being home with the children for more than 6 hours in a row? That's scary. It turned out people love being home. People love their children. Children love to be home. Some beautiful stuff came out of this. Did bad stuff come out of it? Did ugly? Yes. What, is that surprising? Is that impressive? That's ordinary. The good stuff that came out, amazing. Amazing. So this is the process that we have to go through in the development and the unveiling of the world reaching its perfection with Mashiach. Mashiach is not a miraculous event. Mashiach does not perform miracles. It's the natural result of all the years of goodness, devotion, sacrifice, commitment, and loyalty to God's commandments, to the goodness of the world, to the perfecting of the world. Now it's time to see the results. 3,333 years we have been planting goodness, godliness. It's time for those plants to blossom. And tonight, tomorrow, this is the Rosh Hashanah for those events. So we should look forward to seeing the blossoming of a perfected world where good is good and evil can't last. Because once you turn the light on to the evil, it goes away. It has served its purpose. It is no longer necessary. It's over. From now on, the world will move only in one direction, and that is goodness. So one final analogy, which I think is wonderful. There's a huge ship. It is steaming towards Jerusalem, to the promised land, which from New York would be east. Now, on the deck, there's one guy who insists on walking towards the west on the ship. He's walking towards the west. Would you panic? Would you worry that he is going to change the course of the ship? Not really. How about if 10 people are walking towards the west? Will that harm our progress? Will that change the course of the ship? No, not really. What if everyone on the ship was walking towards the west? Makes no difference. They're all going to end up in the promised land. Because the ship has one direction and it will not change. God has one goal, and he is moving the world in that direction always, always. It's a shame that there are people who are going to the promised land and they don't know it. They're not enjoying the journey. So they're going to end up in the promised land. Everybody does. Everybody will. But isn't it a shame that people don't face the direction that they're going in? So it is now our mitzvah, our biggest obligation, to look around and help those people who have gotten a little disoriented and tell them, you're going to the promised land. Enjoy the journey. That's where our confidence comes from. Not because we're smart or because we're strong or because we know, what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't. But we know what God's plan is. And we know that you can't mess up God's plan. You can only fail to enjoy it. So out of love for our fellow beings, Jews and non-Jews, you got to reach out. Nothing dramatic, nothing heroic. All that stuff was already performed by our ancestors. Our grandparents were all heroes, bigger than life. They accomplished the big stuff. What's left for us to do? Tiny little mitzvahs. Like the virus that we're suffering from, how tiny is that? How tiny is that? And yet, look at what it's doing to us, which gives us a lot of encouragement. Because if a microscopic evil, which is what a virus is, if a microscopic evil can cause so much damage, imagine what a microscopic mitzvah can do in the positive. Because the positive is always stronger than the negative. So a tiny mitzvah can change a person's life, bring him back to life after he despairs and gives up and is disillusioned and frustrated and has lost hope. A phone call, friendly word, just showing an interest. They used to say, pick up the phone. You don't have to pick up a phone. Type in a message. You're online anyway. Think of people who need to hear from you. Call a friend and tell them that not only shouldn't they give up, but that they should become part of the solution. Do a mitzvah. Do a microscopic mitzvah, like lighting candles before Shabbos. Nobody will know. It's not heroic. It won't make it to the news, I guarantee you. Microscopic. But don't underestimate what microscopic can do. So it's not enough to survive. It's not enough to weather the storm. We have to change the darkness into light and the bitterness into sweetness. And it doesn't take much. It doesn't take much. So let's get busy. Let's get busy. We are not victims. We are God's partners. And as God is directing the world in its proper course, we got to contribute. We got to partner with him. Those people on deck who are walking in the wrong direction, help them out. Help them out. Turn them around. Stop running. Things are good. We're going to the promised land. The promised land, by the way, is not a location. Promised land means all land we were promised would become holy. The whole world. So we are moving towards that promise wherever we are in the world. So don't be stingy with your wisdom. Don't be stingy with your love. Don't be stingy with your caring. Make the world better. And you don't even have to leave your house to do that. When we're busy making the world better, we become invulnerable. When you're so alive, then viruses can't touch you. Because a virus is a parasite, doesn't have a life of its own. Parasites can feed off that which is alive only if the life is weak, vulnerable. But when the life is enthusiastic, the virus can't. So the antidote to what's going on in the world today, whether it's the politics, it's the violence, it's the frustrations, it's the virus, whatever it is, the solution is the same. Enthusiastic life. And enthusiastic life means I know why I'm here, I know what I'm supposed to do, and I'm doing it. I'm not sitting here wondering what's going on. I'm deciding what's going to go on. What's going to go on is there's going to be more goodness if I can help it. So let's get busy.
We have a Sunday night program for VIPs that you might be interested in. It's informal, it's questions and answers, it's conversation. It's really relaxed, it's really pleasant, enjoyable, informative, and kind of community-like. It's a Sunday night program. There's a Wednesday morning program for the VIPs, and there's a Wednesday night program. All of it just conversation, casual, laid back, unscripted. So join us, take a look, click the link below and see which of the three suits you best, and join us for some enjoyable conversation.